What if the money in your bank account could be controlled, limited, or switched off without warning, and the world calls it progress? Right now, a silent war is happening behind screens and algorithms, where governments, AI systems, and digital currencies are fighting for power, and most people don't even know they're on the battlefield. This video will expose how digital money really works, how the rules are changing in 2026, why the elite are preparing quietly, and what happens to those who stay unaware. This is not fear, this is reality, and by the end of this video, you will never look at money, banks, or your future the same way again. What if I told you the biggest war happening right now has no soldiers, no bombs, and no headlines? But it decides who gets rich, who stays trapped, and who loses control forever. This is not a war between countries. This is a war between systems. Cash vs. code. Banks vs. algorithms, governments vs. decentralization. Humans vs. artificial intelligence. Welcome to Digital Money Wars. And if you don't understand it by 2026, you won't be poor by accident, you'll be poor by design. Money is changing again. First we had gold, then paper money, then plastic cards, now digital money. But this time, the change is not just about convenience. It's about control. Digital money is not neutral. It can be programmed, tracked, limited, switched off, and different powerful groups want to control it. That's why this is a war not loud, not obvious, but brutal. Digital money wars will not wait for you. They will not ask permission. They will not slow down. By the time most people realize what happened, the rules will already be locked. This is the moment where awareness beats ignorance, preparation beats panic, mindset beats money. You are not late. But you are on the edge. Choose to understand, choose to adapt. Choose to think beyond the system. Because in the digital money wars, the most dangerous position is doing nothing. And the future doesn't belong to the strongest. It belongs to the most prepared. Now let's go deeper into what most people never question, because the real danger is not digital money itself. It's blind trust in systems you don't understand, and history proves this again and again. Every major financial collapse didn't start with panic. It started with comfort. People believed their money was safe because it always had been, until one day rules changed overnight. Banks closed, withdrawals were limited, inflation exploded, and suddenly years of hard work turned into numbers that could buy less and less. And digital systems accelerate this process because speed removes human hesitation. Algorithms don't feel sympathy. AI doesn't care about your story. It follows instructions and incentives. And those incentives are rarely designed for your freedom. They are designed for efficiency, stability, and control. And control always flows upward, never downward, which is why understanding this war is not about choosing sides emotionally, but about positioning yourself intelligently. Because the future won't reward loyalty to a system. It will reward flexibility, adaptability, and awareness, and this is where most people fail. They think money is something you earn and spend, but money is actually a language of power, and digital money is a programmable language, which means rules can be written into it, like where you can spend, how fast you must spend, what you are allowed to buy, and under what conditions your access can be restricted. And once this becomes normal, resistance becomes almost impossible because convenience seduces people faster than force ever could, just like smartphones traded privacy for comfort and social media traded attention for dopamine. Digital money will trade autonomy for ease, and most people will accept it willingly, because the system won't look like a prison. It will look like an upgrade. And while the average person argues online about whether crypto is a scam or banks are safe, the real players are building hybrid strategies, blending old world assets with new world systems, owning things that exist outside pure digital control, while also mastering the tools of the digital economy, because they know no single system lasts forever. And this is where mindset becomes more important than money itself. Because wealth has always moved to those who understand transitions early, not those who react late, and 2026 is a transition year where AI-driven finance, digital identity, and programmable money intersect, creating a world where your financial life is increasingly tied to your digital behavior, your reputation score, your compliance, your predictability, and unpredictability becomes a risk the system doesn't like, which is why independent thinkers, creators, and adaptable earners will have an advantage, because income that flows from skills, knowledge, and global reach is harder to shut down than income that flows from a single employer or institution. And this doesn't mean panic or paranoia. It means maturity, understanding that systems are tools, not gods, and tools should never be trusted blindly. They should be used strategically. And the biggest mistake people make is thinking preparation requires massive wealth, when in reality it requires awareness, learning, and diversification of thought, because even small actions taken early compound massively over time, while large actions taken late barely move the needle. And this war will not end with one winner. It will evolve continuously. Rules will shift, technologies will update, narratives will change, and those who survive and thrive will be those who don't emotionally attach themselves to one story, one currency, one platform, or one promise, but instead stay mentally mobile, financially curious, and strategically humble, always asking who benefits from this system. What assumptions am I making? And what happens if the rules change tomorrow? Because that question alone separates participants from victims. And remember this, no system in history has ever been introduced for your convenience, without also increasing leverage for those who control it. And digital money is no exception. It's powerful, efficient, and inevitable. But inevitability does not mean surrender. It means preparation. Because the goal is not to escape the system. That's unrealistic. The goal is to not be trapped by it, to have options, perspectives, and the ability to move when others can't. And this is why education, especially self-education, becomes the most valuable asset of the next decade. Because money can be frozen, platforms can be banned, accounts can be restricted. But understanding travels with you, adapts with you, and compounds silently, and those who invest in understanding how money, technology, and power intersect will not need to fear the future. They will navigate it, while others wake up one day confused, angry, and asking how everything changed so fast, not realizing the war was never hidden. It was just quiet, gradual, and wrapped in convenience. And every single day you delay understanding is a day the system understands you better than you understand it, which is why attention right now is more valuable than agreement. You don't need to accept everything, you just need to see clearly, because clarity is the first form of freedom in any system, especially one built on code data and invisible rules. And as this transformation accelerates, another subtle shift happens that most people overlook, which is psychological conditioning. Because when money becomes invisible, spending becomes emotional. And when spending becomes emotional, control becomes effortless. People stop thinking in terms of value and start thinking in terms of taps, swipes, approvals, and notifications. And this disconnect between effort and reward slowly weakens financial discipline, making people easier to guide, easier to influence, easier to push into cycles of consumption and debt that feel normal, but are mathematically impossible to escape. And digital systems love predictability. They reward consistent behavior and punish deviation. Which means the more you behave like the average user, the more smoothly the system treats you. But the moment you step outside expected patterns, questions appear, friction increases, limits show up. And this is where many people confuse safety with obedience, thinking compliance equals protection, when in reality it often equals dependency, and dependency is fragile, because it only works as long as the system remains stable, benevolent, and aligned with your interests, which history shows is never permanent. And this is why adaptability is the real currency of the future, not just money itself. Because money locked inside a rigid identity becomes a liability, while money paired with flexible skills, global access, and diversified thinking becomes leverage. And this is already visible in how work is changing, with location, independent income, digital products, AI-assisted services, and decentralized platforms slowly breaking the monopoly of traditional employment, not because corporations are evil, but because systems optimize for efficiency, not loyalty, and humans who understand this stop asking for security and start building resilience, which is a completely different mindset. One that accepts uncertainty as normal and prepares for it instead of denying it. And this preparation doesn't mean withdrawing from society or rejecting technology. It means engaging with it consciously, understanding how incentives shape outcomes, how algorithms prioritize profit over well-being, and how narratives are used to normalize changes that would have been rejected if introduced suddenly, because slow change feels safe. Gradual loss feels invisible, and by the time people notice, they've already adapted, which is exactly how powerful systems maintain stability, and stability is the ultimate goal, even if it comes at the cost of individual freedom. And this is why conversations about digital money often become emotional or polarized, because money is not just a tool, it's identity, security, status, and survival. And when those are threatened, rational thinking becomes difficult, which again benefits those who design the system, because confusion keeps people reactive instead of strategic. And in this environment, the greatest advantage is not secret knowledge. It's pattern recognition, seeing how technology, regulation, and human behavior move together, understanding that every new layer of convenience adds a layer of dependency, and every new promise of safety introduces a trade-off that someone else benefits from. And once you see this pattern, you stop being surprised by policy changes, platform restrictions, or financial shocks, because you understand they are not accidents, they are outcomes, and outcomes follow incentives, not intentions. And this understanding changes how you make decisions, how you save, how you earn, how you spend, and how you invest your time, because time is the most undervalued asset in the digital money era, especially attention, since attention feeds algorithms, and algorithms shape opportunity, which means where you focus determines what the system learns about you, and what it learns determines how it treats you. And this feedback loop is becoming tighter every year, especially as AI integrates deeper into finance, credit, insurance, employment, and even social trust, creating a world where your financial future is increasingly automated, scored, and optimized according to models you never see and cannot appeal to. Which again doesn't mean rejection, it means awareness, because awareness allows you to design your life with margins, buffers, and alternatives instead of maximum efficiency and zero flexibility. And efficiency looks attractive until something breaks, at which point resilience becomes priceless, and resilience comes from optionality, the ability to move, pivot, adapt, and survive shocks without collapse. And this is where many people misunderstand wealth, thinking it's about accumulation when it's actually about control over time and choice, the ability to say no, the ability to wait, the ability to reposition when conditions change. And digital money, when understood properly, can either amplify that control or erase it completely, depending on how consciously it's used. And the tragedy is that most people will only learn this lesson after experiencing loss, because pain is a powerful teacher, but it's also an expensive one. And this speech exists to shorten that learning curve, not by offering guarantees or predictions, but by sharpening perception. because perception precedes preparation, and preparation precedes freedom, and in a world moving this fast, clarity is no longer optional, it's survival. And every individual who chooses to understand these dynamics becomes harder to manipulate, harder to trap, and harder to silence, because systems are strongest against ignorance and weakest against awareness. And while the future will not be fair, it will be navigable for those who refuse to sleepwalk into it, who question defaults, who diversify not just assets but identities, who remain curious instead of comfortable, and who understand that the digital money wars are not something that will happen someday. They are already shaping behavior, opportunity, and power right now, quietly, efficiently, and relentlessly. And the only real choice left is whether you observe this shift consciously or experience it unconsciously, because the system doesn't need your permission to evolve, but it does respond to how prepared you are to engage with it. And as this landscape keeps shifting, another layer reveals itself, which is the social divide created by digital money, because access will no longer be just about income, but about compliance, literacy, and alignment with system expectations, meaning two people with the same skills and effort can experience completely different financial realities simply based on how well they understand and navigate the digital rules. And this creates a silent separation between those who feel constantly stressed, monitored, and restricted, and those who feel fluid, mobile, and opportunistic, not because they are smarter or luckier, but because they learned how the game works before it hardened, and this divide will grow quietly, without riots or announcements, until it feels normal that some people move freely while others feel stuck despite working harder than ever. And this is where frustration grows, because people sense something is wrong, but can't name it. They feel pressure without understanding its source, blaming inflation, employers, or technology itself, when the real issue is misalignment between old financial habits and new financial systems, and systems don't adapt to people. People are forced to adapt to systems, which is why those who cling to nostalgia about how money, who's to work, will suffer the most, while those who accept that change is permanent can start designing strategies that fit reality instead of fighting it. And one of the biggest misunderstandings is thinking that digital money removes human decision-making, when in fact it concentrates it, because fewer people now design rules that affect millions instantly. And once rules are embedded in code, they become harder to question, harder to challenge, and easier to enforce, which shifts power away from negotiation and toward automation. And automation feels neutral, but always reflects the values of its creators, and those values prioritize scale, efficiency, and predictability, not individual nuance. And this is why edge cases suffer first: freelancers, migrants, small creators, unconventional thinkers, because they don't fit neatly into standardized boxes, and standardized systems struggle with complexity, which leads to exclusions that are not personal, but feel deeply personal when they affect your ability to live, pay, or move. And this again reinforces why flexibility is essential, because rigidity in a flexible world creates friction, while flexibility in a rigid system creates survival. And people who understand this start building lives that are modular rather than fixed, skills that transfer across platforms, income streams that don't rely on a single gatekeeper, networks that extend beyond borders, and identities that are not fully defined by one institution. Because when identity and money become linked digitally, losing access to one can cascade into losing access to many others, creating a form of soft control that doesn't need force, only permission structures. And permission structures shape behavior subtly, nudging people toward what's allowed rather than what's possible. And over time, allowed becomes normal, and normal becomes unquestioned, which is how freedom erodes quietly, not through bans but through defaults. And this is why awareness must be continuous, not a one-time realization, because systems evolve, narratives shift, and what feels empowering today can become restrictive tomorrow, especially when crises are used to accelerate adoption of new rules, because urgency bypasses debate, and fear speeds up acceptance, and every major financial shift in history has been justified by necessity, safety, or stability, which are powerful words that disarm skepticism, and digital money will be no different. It will be presented as inclusive, efficient, and modern, and in many ways it will be. But inclusion without autonomy is not freedom. Efficiency without choice is not empowerment, and modernity without ethics is just speed. And speed amplifies both good and bad outcomes, which means mistakes scale faster, inequality deepens quicker, and recovery becomes harder for those without buffers, and buffers are built long before they're needed. Not during crisis, which is why preparation always feels unnecessary until it becomes urgent. And those who wait for certainty will always be late, because certainty only appears in hindsight, never in advance. And this brings us back to mindset, because mindset determines whether you see change as threat or terrain, something to fear or something to navigate. And those who see terrain start asking better questions, not, will this system save me? But how do I move within this system without being trapped by it? And that shift alone changes behavior, learning priorities, risk tolerance, and long-term planning. Because you stop optimizing for comfort and start optimizing for resilience. And resilience doesn't look impressive on social media. It looks boring, redundant, and cautious. But it survives storms while flashy. Optimized lives often collapse under pressure, and digital money will reward those who build quietly, think long-term, and avoid extremes, because extremes attract attention, and attention invites scrutiny. And scrutiny invites control, and understanding when to be visible and when to be invisible becomes a strategic skill, just like understanding when to adopt new technology and when to wait. Because early adoption brings opportunity, but also risk, and late adoption brings safety, but also limitation. And the art is knowing where you stand, what you can afford to risk, and what you cannot afford to lose. And that self-knowledge is more valuable than any tool. Because tools change, platforms disappear, currencies rise and fall, but self-awareness allows recalibration, and recalibration is how people survive long arcs of change, not by being right once, but by adjusting repeatedly. And this is why the future belongs not to the loudest voices or the most confident predictions, but to those who remain curious, skeptical, and adaptive, who understand that no system is permanent, no advantage is guaranteed, and no rule is final, and instead of resisting this uncertainty, they build lives that can absorb it, learning continuously, diversifying intelligently, and staying mentally agile, because in the digital money wars, rigidity is a weakness, blind trust is a vulnerability, and awareness is the closest thing to armor, not because it stops change, but because it allows movement within it, and movement is the essence of freedom in any system that's constantly rewriting its own rules. The digital money wars are not coming, they are already here, quietly reshaping power, freedom, and opportunity while most people are distracted by comfort and routine, and the final truth is this: no system has ever cared about you as much as you must care about your own awareness, adaptability, and independence. Money is no longer just something you earn, it is something that can guide, limit, or define you if you allow it, and the future will not punish ignorance out of cruelty, but out of design. Those who survive and thrive will not be the richest, loudest, or most confident, but the most prepared, the most flexible, and the most conscious of how power really moves in a digital world. This is your moment to stop sleepwalking, to question defaults, to build options instead of dependencies, and to choose understanding over comfort, because in a world ruled by code, the greatest freedom you can own is the ability to adapt before the rules are locked forever.